Welcome to the very first episode of Charged Kenya, a podcast series where we dive into the fast evolving world of electric mobility here in Kenya. I am your host, Abigael Kima, and today I am joined by Warren Ondanje. We are unpacking the journey of e-mobility in Kenya, from its roots to what is happening now and where it might be headed. Plus, we will also share some reflections from the recent Kenya Power e-mobility conference. And at Hali Hewa Podcast, we're proud to bring you a platform where you can hear from experts from the African continent. Welcome, Warren.
Thanks, Abby. Amazing work that you're doing. I'm very happy that, it's been something like maybe 5 years, at least in my career in the e-mobility space, that finally there's someone that takes e-mobility seriously to actually have a conversation. Initially when we started the whole space was kind of quiet, low, behind the scenes. But as we've gone ahead and now you can see from the conferences and all this other publicity, space is really taking shape. So I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you for allowing Hali Hewa Podcast to be the platform where you would want to share more about the work that you do. So I'd like you to just introduce yourself to the audience, tell us who you are, what you do, and I hope I didn't butcher your name.
You did very well, actually. You're one of the exceptions on this. I'm Warren Ondanje from the Africa E-Mobility Alliance. That's at least where I work day to day. My role is to lead the organization in achieving its vision, which is to see that Africa manages to transition, as the rest of the world transition, into this new wave of clean transport method. And in our case, that's electric mobility. I'm in charge of this organization, and as an organization, we raise awareness and evidence on electric mobility, and we advise business and political leaders on how they can make electric vehicles accessible and usable to the common person on the continent. So in very many words, we want that every single person today in Africa, one, knows that and knows, even if they don't care, they know about electric vehicles and that they exist in the continent. And number two is that they have the means or the awareness to get started with electric mobility. So we want to make knowledge very common, but also the pathway towards accessing like an electric vehicle very easy. And all this is to ensure that as the rest of the world is moving away from internal combustion engines, that Africa is not caught second with receiving imports of used ICE vehicles that are not only polluting, but are old technology, and they don't provide any new economic opportunities for the young people who are looking for something exciting that's tech forward.
Amazing. I think like most people, a lot of us have not actually interacted with, say, electric vehicles, as you've put it. And oftentimes I've asked myself, what exactly is e-mobility? Is it only the cars? Is it only the vehicles? Is it the borders that we see now? Is it the bikes that we see now delivering food? So in a nutshell, how would you describe e-mobility, especially for someone who's probably not interacted with it? And how is it any different from what we've grown up with in terms of the means of transport that we're used to?
Yeah, good question. You might be surprised about how quickly electric mobility is becoming. When you walk outside or maybe when you order your next takeaway meal, just watch who is delivering that. Likely it's going to be someone on a bicycle, and most likely that's going to be an electric bicycle, just because it's become one of the most affordable ways to deliver goods around the city. And hopefully this is also going to trickle outwards. So for those who might not be familiar with when you hear e-mobility or electric mobility, it's simply the use of electricity to power vehicles and other mobility systems. And this is also drawing from a certain energy source. It can be batteries. Most commonly, it is actually batteries, but it can also be other technologies such as fuel cells. And in vehicles such as hybrid vehicles that you see around, they're drawing their energy from the fossil fuels to power some electrical mechanism within the vehicle to power it forward. So when we speak about EVs or e-mobility, Usually we're referring to 100% battery electric vehicles, which are any vehicle. By vehicle, I mean this can be a motorbike, it can be a bicycle, it can be a bus, it can be a car that draws its power from a battery. Then it has a mechanism in the form of a motor and some other electronics help the whole thing forward. So it's usually the motor, which is the core that converts this energy in the battery into motion. That's what propels the vehicle forward. So the key differences between when you hear an EV or an E vehicle with an traditional system that we're used to, the usual, fossil fuel vehicle. Number one, it's the propulsion system. Unlike the combustion engine vehicles that we're used to, that number one has a very loud sound that you put in fuel. The difference is that in an ICE vehicle or a regular vehicle, you're putting in fuel, that's chemical energy that normally goes through the engine and it's burnt and converts that heat into some sort of motion. So that heat is what is converted through mechanical system into the motion that drives the car. And you're basically containing a bunch of, hundreds or thousands of explosion within the front part of the vehicle to actually convert that to motion. Whereas in an EV, it's different because now you're converting electricity that has been charging the car, stop a battery, into the mechanical system that moves the vehicle. So think of it as a smartphone with wheels. That's how it is.
I don't. I like that analogy, as smartphone in a wheel. I think most people will relate to that just because of how we are addicted to our phones at this point in time. Yeah.
So one is a generator or a power source on wheels. Then the other is a smartphone on wheels. So just choose which one you want to go with. And when we talk about EVs as well, one thing to note is that there's a difference in the energy efficiency. And this is simply how much fuel you put in or how much you charge it compared to how much motion or range that it gives you. So with a normal car, believe it or not, just about for every 10 liters you put in, really only 3 liters is what moves you forward. The rest is lost in heat, in sounds, in any movement of all those systems within your car. That is how efficient it is. With an EV, you put in 10 liters, you're getting around 8 to 9 liters that actually moves you forward. So that's the other difference in technology between these two. And that's why EVs are a lot more exciting because they are efficient, meaning for the same amount of money, you're getting more range. Hopefully, if you're working and your job depends on driving, then you're saving a lot more.
Well, yeah, that was a full physics class for people like myself who are not that good in physics. So thank you for for explaining that. It's very it's quite clear with a very interesting analogy. And obviously we are having conversations around e-mobility now, especially in relation to, reducing our emissions. And in many spaces I've been asked a lot of times, like, if I want to particularly contribute to reducing my own footprint as a kawaida citizen, what can I do? And most of the time you just think, okay, you can walk more, you can ride a bicycle instead of taking your car around. But I honestly believe this series will help people understand the difference between the cars that they use and why e-mobility is the way to go. And I'm just curious to know, so in relation, of course, to issues of climate, when did Kenya start, becoming, looking in that direction? I know there's the commitment under the Paris Agreement, but could you just give us a bit of history of Kenya's e-mobility revolution?
Yeah. Kenya's start is a little bit unexpected because it's always the pioneers, the slightly crazy thinkers who bring this kind of technology and imagine it as, if all this has been happening out there, why not Kenya? So it was a few crazy people. I may see them that way because 2016 to 2018 was really the early foundings of e-mobility in the country. That's when two people, one of who I know very well, company is called Drag Electric. They've been importing Nissan Leafs. It's a certain brand of Nissan.
Yeah, I have seen them around.
Yes, those electric cars, they are electric because they're pretty quiet and they are actually just fully electric. They've been bringing them from the UK, some coming from Japan, and those are really early days. I would say the early adopters were the ones that were buying those vehicles because no one understood what EVs really were. The other big main fear was, where are we going to service these? Who understands them? Another company that also sprung up around the same time it was called Opipus. Now you know it. You probably know them as Bloom. They were doing conversion of these Land Cruisers for the game reserves and game parks. And that was also a very niche segment that there could be any. The people operating these reserves and parks were very environmentally conscious and could afford that conversion. So those couple of examples provided the earliest tests and feasibilities for where electric mobility would go. Fast forward a little bit to 2019. We had an opportunity as a country, but that I still feel we missed. There's a devolution conference in 2019 in Kirinyaga, where certain vehicle was displayed called BJ 150. I don't know if you ever heard something like that, but it was apparently a locally built car for Kenya. It was a small four-wheel vehicle with a motorbike engine, 150cc, that had the limelight, but it wasn't very good looking. It was not very high performance. It was claimed to be so soon be rolled out in full production at 450,000, but that never took off. And Kenyans being Kenyans, you know how we love foreign brands. People are very quickly to shoot down that brand. Kebs tried to give them a go ahead in terms of certification, but really no one vibed with that thing. And that I felt like those were probably the early days where we could have introduced some electric motorbike or an electric tuk-tuk. But either way, 2019, still, there were some early pilots that were being done out in Western Kenya under a project by one of the foundations locally called Siemens Foundations. And here they had a whole hub that was solar powered. There were electric motorbikes that were being piloted around the hub on the shores of Lake Victoria. There was also a pilot of electric boats that were running at that time. And these were electric outboard engines that fishermen could be using. And they were testing the business models. There were even cargo bikes transporting fresh water around the shorelines of the Victoria. It was very exciting. The hub still exists today. And a few of the Rome bikes were actually operating there. I had a chance to see, and it was really interesting because those were the early days people were actually watching out for these pilots and trying to learn what's happening. That was 2018. Come to 2020, it's really where we started seeing the early acceleration, because I feel up to 2019, we were stagnating with a couple of pilots and maybe around 5 to 7 companies. But 2020, that's where we jumped to 10 to 15 companies. There was the early acceleration companies like Arkwright, Kiri, Veeam, Busy Mobility, Nico Boda had just started and piloting. And these were now pilots around Nairobi because the other pilots had been outside Nairobi. Save from that, the earlier pilots were also four-wheelers. So these newer pilots and starts were for two-wheelers primarily. So yeah, and COVID hit, we all know. People went back home, everyone, not movement, but also that's when deliveries took off. And I think that provided a silver lining for many of these startups to really test out what clean transport can look like. I was also employed in one of the companies, and that's where I got to do one of the earliest electric deliveries in the country, food deliveries. Straight from one of the art cafes around Westlands and to one of the olds around Westlands as well. It was an amazing thing. That also made me really believe in this momentum that was happening. It was in near that we saw the Finance Act. I just have a couple of points coming around to 2020, just towards the end, middle of 2019, 2020. That's when we had the Finance Acts, and That's when we got the first set of incentives. I think it was a reduction of excess duties for the four-wheelers. And adoption did not jump because it targeted the wrong vehicle segment. It was not targeting the two-wheelers. For 2021, that's when we really saw the market grow, because that's when the number of companies doubled. We had new entrants in the bus segment, in the bicycle segment. That's when we saw the first deployments. We started getting towards critical mass in terms of the number of companies. And that's also when the government now became serious, and we saw incentives for those people that were doing assembly. So assembly meant that you could bring in components and then have people locally work on them to build their full product. All this while accessing low input duties, and there wasn't any excess duty for people that were bringing in buses or assembling motorbikes locally. So that really provided an opportunity for us to jump from roughly 10 to 15 to about 25 companies. And now 2023, 2024, that's when we're just at that hockey stick moment. And we're still going, because between 2023, 2024, we saw actually 2022, 2023, a doubling of the fleet of vehicles from 700, I think, to around 2,000. From 2,000, we jumped to 5,000. So again, we doubled. And I think this trajectory will continue. So if we're not doubling, we're seeing growth of more than 50%. It's also in that 2023 period that the e-mobility tariff was introduced. There was a formation of an e-mobility association of Kenya. And then the Finance Act also now became even more lucrative because it provided more incentives for the companies. VAT was removed for electric bicycles, motorcycles, buses, and also batteries. So that really opened up the market, because policy usually accelerates the enabling environment, because all these innovators were there. They're just waiting for the right policy environment.
Yeah.
And you see now with that comes employment. Young people are now getting into this new technology. But yeah, that's in a nutshell where we've come from and how the space now looks. 50 companies later, more than $50 million, a whole association, and close to 10,000 EVs on the road today in Kenya.
Great. I love how you have the chronology of events, which means you're definitely the right person for this conversation. And you've actually gone to the next question that I wanted to ask, which was how much policy creates an enabling environment. And you've talked about the e-mobility tariffs, you've talked about the Finance Act. And I'm just curious to know where we are right now. And I know Kenya hosting the Africa Climate Summit was such a pivotal moment for Kenya as a whole in terms of climate commitments. And I remember, I think during the Africa Climate Summit, there was a session where the president either, came from State House with a fleet of electric vehicles. And I remember a lot of people actually talked about it, or that was the first time we saw electric vehicles on TV and it being an actual conversation. And so I just want to understand where, we are at right now with the policies that allows for, e-mobility to continue to be widespread across the country. And another question that I've always been curious about is, how is the public receiving it? And if I were to get an electric car today, would I easily travel from Nairobi to my shads, which is E10, So are there charging spots along the way? Like, what does that look like?
During the Africa Climate Summit, that was 2023,
Yeah.
the president also came forward, at least show that the continent it's embracing climate conscious moves or actions. Even though I still critique that, because that was a one-off. They're still riding in the big guzzling
Yeah.
vehicles. Yet today there are EVs that one can buy that are pretty luxurious, comfortable, can be used by statesmen or a regular person. It's also that political will that we still need, even though it's showing in some of the incentives that are coming up, because in the latest finance bill, 2025, 2026, there has been a stipulation of changing the tax definition of EVs to there's a certain technicality in the change of value added tax.
Mhm.
So it's being proposed to move from zero rated VAT to taxing and to VAT exempt. That has slightly different consequences because it makes EVs a bit more expensive for the end consumer.
Ah.
In very few words, companies are not able to claim VAT as they usually do, meaning if they can't claim that these costs can be passed on to the end
That's
consumer.
strong.
So that change will make EVs expensive for the end consumer, even though it's still in proposal. So I'm hoping some negotiations will go ahead. Government has been supportive of the EV space through tax changes and tax incentives that lower the cost of duties for people who are importing these kits and the parts to assemble locally,
Mhm.
but also lowering the cost on sales so that when you're selling this EV, you're not supposed to pass these duties or taxes to the customer. I think all this has been coming from the understanding that once you put an EV on the road, it is a direct consumer of electricity. And this electricity is coming from Kenya Power, that is going to be the perpetual vendor power. So therefore, the government recoups money from the continuous purchase of power over a duration of time. And that is the other understanding from a policymaker's point, that this is a bit of a different technology in that, unlike your normal cars, when you buy this car, it means the government has to commit to spending money to import these fuels from the Middle East to come and bring it to you. And in the process of importing this, the government also has to spend its dollar reserves to procure this fuel from abroad. Meaning our local foreign reserves, foreign currency is usually depleted, put under a lot of pressure. Every car that you're adding in the road that is consuming fuel. Whereas if you're now flipping over to EVs, then the government no longer needs to be burdened by spending this amount, and it just taps into the electricity that's available locally, that's being generated locally. We know our grid is fairly clean; it's actually almost getting to 100%,
Yeah.
and this power is locally generated, employing locals in the country. So it's doing an environmental good, but also a social and economic good whenever you are considering or can afford to buy locally. And when it comes to costs, the cost is actually one of the main challenges about access to EVs.
Mhm.
Primarily because if you're looking at from a manufacturer's point, for the same specification between a regular car and an EV, the price difference ranges anywhere from 30 to maybe even double the price, because it's newer technology, it has more sophistication. Even though the number of components internally are less, and this vehicle requires less maintenance, the upfront cost is what is usually high. So when you bring these vehicles to the country and you're loading the same exact tax, then in the end, one is by default 30% to 200% more expensive than the other.
Yeah.
It's important to understand this, and even for policymakers to ensure that the incentivization lowers this cost to make sure that the vehicles are both around the same price point after you've loaded all the tax layers. The one way that companies are now going around this is by having innovative financing. EVs today in Kenya are primarily motorbikes, taxis, and buses. Question to you: what do you notice about those three different vehicle segments?
Hmm. Interesting. So,
Bikes, buses, taxis. What's common about those three things? Three segments.
I'm probably overthinking this. Is it that it is mostly used by the public?
Right. That's it.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
So if it's being used by the public,
Mm-hmm.
um, it it also means that the people who are operating these are very cost conscious because that's how they make their money. They want the lowest operating cost, the highest return. And basically, the lower they can operate, the better for them. And this is why today, if you're walking around Nairobi, if you go on your Uber app and order, they will probably see an electric order as one of the top options.
Yeah.
And more in Nairobi also, there are electric buses. I just see lots of a few new taxi fleets. These are public shared and commercial transport services that are taking off the fastest because it means higher return for the operator, basically.
Mm-hmm.
This operator can only access these vehicles now today because their financing is spread over a period of time. They're not being forced to pay something like 300, 200, 300,000 for motorcycle. And normal player will not afford that, but they will afford a 50 or 20,000 deposit, then weekly, daily payments up to the point that they fully pay this product. Same thing is happening on the bus front. All these circles that are formed, they don't buy vehicles up front. They usually with bank financing. So that financing is also what's allowing EVs to be sold in the country because if it's more expensive, it just means there's a longer payment. And for any operator, they are more sensitive not to the total price that they're paying, but to whether they can afford a daily or a weekly repayment. So if I'm a rider and you're telling me I should pay you, I'll pay you 100,000 over the next 1 year, I can't really conceptualize. But if you're telling me I pay you 1,000 bob every day, then I'll do my math and say, can I afford to pay you that every day? That's the math that the e-mobility companies are doing. As long as that's matchy with the operators' expectations, then the technology will take off. Policy will only help in providing a better environment. It will help reduce costs because lower removed. But financing is really what accelerates it because it allows more people to buy these things. So if you want to buy today, most likely you might consider taking bank financing for a period of time. We don't yet have decent financing for private users, but we have innovative financing for the commercial users. So today, me or you, either we have a certain government tender that we can get lots of money to buy these cars. Our other option is probably to consider light duty vehicles, i.e., either a motorcycle or a bicycle. I think a bicycle is extremely useful, especially if you're not commuting too far, if you're not using the main major highways, because it's also a safety concern. Uh, if you're someone who takes a matatu and does a 30-minute commute or even 40 minutes, you're probably going to be on a save you a lot more money and you'll have the opportunity to go wherever else over the weekend or go hang out with your friends. So that's the difference in how today's e-mobility landscape looks. The positive thing is that as more and more EV adoption happens, then we'll start seeing public charging infrastructure pop up, driven by these commercial guys. So the good thing is that there's more and more stations coming up around Nairobi. There are even stations outside Nairobi along the major transport corridors. So I would say Nakuru, Eldoret, going down that way, going up to Nanyuki, going down to Mombasa. Those points, at least in the major towns, there are charging points being established.
Mm-hmm. And are these charging points owned by private companies, or is there any government related stations that might also pop up?
Okay. So Kenya Power is the main utility that has been indicating interest to support charging infrastructure. They are yet to roll out public charging stations at scale. I think they only have a couple at their offices, which they allow, or they have been allowing the public to use. But the main deployments up to now have been with private sector players. I see that the utility might not independently deploy the chargers. They might get into public-private partnerships where they avail the power up to that point, or they might even install those chargers, but then it's a private sector player that gets to operate them. Simply because the technology is evolving so quickly that a utility might get caught up if they're the ones setting up and owning these stations. But private sector is usually a lot more agile up with in that PPP structure, so that the utility still gets what it wants, but those the private sector can adopt to the changing technology.
Yeah. So basically, a lot of collaborations between government and private sector. You've talked about Kenya Power as the monopoly. Let's not get into it, but there was recently an e-mobility conference, and I had mentioned earlier we would also dive into some of the reflections from your experience, what the conversations are looking like at the moment in terms of e-mobility in Kenya, and of course Kenya Power as a key player. So what was that like? And another question in relation to that was also how do you feel based off of your experience, is the public receiving e-mobility? You've talked about a lot of the people who are in the commercial transport sector are looking towards that direction because it's probably cheaper for them to afford a daily or weekly repayment plan. But then generally, are we seeing more people wanting to use electric vehicles as a whole to get from point A to point B? What does that look like from your experience?
Okay. So I'll start with the Kenya Power event first. This was the fourth edition of the event. So yeah, fourth edition. It's had a much larger attendance, but it continuously gets that publicity, the visibility of the different media houses. I think that's very good because it continuously positions Kenya Power as this main partner for electricity, electricity setup and distribution. The other thing that fascinates me or came to mind as I was thinking about this question is that Kenya Power or the e-mobility conversation is actually finally becoming serious. Kenya Power has a whole list of customer segments: domestic, commercial, industrial, residential, street lighting, and the rest. And it also has a little line there that started in 2023 called e-mobility. So you ask yourself, why would any utility hold a conference for one line, the customer segment, amongst maybe 7 or, and this segment only provided 0.01% of the power consumption between June of 2023 and July of 2023. It definitely means there's something serious there. And what's that thing? That thing is that e-mobility has the potential to finally start consuming power that was unutilized or undemanded during the off-peak periods. So at night, buses and cars, even your motorcycles and bicycles can all be plugged in and charged at night because more often than not, these vehicles are fine or have enough of a range to actually operate during the day. And this realization also for the utilities, because of the types of contract that the utility has put in, or the generation people put in, meaning to that take or pay, meaning whether you generate, consume or generate, or you don't consume, you still paying. So this added distinction would just help improve the economics of the sector. Kenya Power in itself, 2 of the last 5 years have been loss-making. So I'm sure this is another opportunity to try and improve those numbers by treating customer that really is going to start eating into that utilized capacity. Second point is potential carbon financing utility because a regular ICE vehicle, a regular traditional vehicle that consumes fuel emits a lot. It emits somewhere to the tune of 0.2 kilos per, I'm trying to get my numbers right. The consumption is CO2 per energy suit. And if I'm just to make a comparison between electricity consumption and fuel consumption, there's a difference of roughly 800% difference in the amount of CO2 emitted between taking power from the grid versus fueling your car using traditional. So that 700 to 800% difference is what provides the opportunity for carbon financing or access to carbon credits, basically. If you're consuming power from the grid to drive a matatu, and that matatu would have otherwise consumed fuel and emitted those CO2 emissions, the difference in emissions is so big that I think that becomes another compelling point.
Yeah,
It's also the utility, because in there with generating these carbon credits, the utility might gain or the companies might also gain, which means that hopefully these benefits can be passed to the end consumer that is now moving on the road. So you could become a beneficiary of carbon financing just by using an electric car. And the final opportunity is the potential for Kenya Power to now accelerate its power access initiative. Right now, we are roughly at 79% energy access, electricity access, but that is supposed to reach 100% by 2030. We are at 2025 now. I believe that if Kenya Power is seeing another mobility company pop up in Western Kenya, in Central Kenya, around the coast, Northeastern Kenya, then these companies will demand that there's power access. So that also becomes another motivator for the utility to keep on expanding. So I saw those as potential touch points that the utility might start taking this line on the remaining customer profiles a bit more seriously. And yeah, my hope is that that also shows the e-mobility players and other investors that there's actually something important happening that should not be passed on an opportunity.
Yeah. Wow, I am really loving these conversations just because I'm learning a lot. And there's a lot to unpack. Like the more you keep talking, I'm like, okay, we should probably have an entire episode on this aspect only. But of course, we have to keep it short and sweet. I'm sure there are things we haven't talked about, but we'll definitely have them in the subsequent episodes. You did talk about the safety concerns and looking at Kenya's infrastructure, even how we built our roads. There's hardly any room for other, how do I put it? Like, say the bicycles or the motorcycles. People are struggling a lot more in terms of using such means of transport, and it's the easiest, I guess, to enter the market when it comes to electrified modes of transport. So, from everything you've talked about, from the history, what do you think Kenya's landscape will look like in the next 5 to 10 years? And are there things that you feel the government, and by government, I mean everyone who's supposed to be a key player in pushing this agenda forward, could potentially try and do differently to ensure that maybe the public is adopting these modes of transport more, ensuring safety, and of course achieving our own goals in terms of emission reductions. And we know that, we've just submitted our NDC, the National Determined Contributions, and it's quite ambitious, moving from 32% by 2030 to 35% by 2035. And I went through it, and there's a lot of priority on transition. And of course, that speaks to energy a lot. So yes, to sum it up, what would our landscape look like in the next 5 to 10 years, and then what could all these key players do to make sure it's actually being absorbed better. Yeah.
Yeah, good point. Next 5 to 10 years, already we've seen our neighbors, Rwanda and Ethiopia, move ahead and start really pushing their policy environment towards embracing EVs. Ethiopia completely banned the import of ICE vehicles starting January 2024. And this year, Kigali stopped registering new ICE motorcycles.
Mm-hmm.
So that already provides us like two compelling cases of if we are sleeping on the job as a country, then our investors and maybe even the beneficiary that would have benefited from electric vehicles, we might lose that opportunity to our neighbors if we are not going to provide this matching, enabling environment as quickly as what other countries are doing.
Yeah.
A couple of things that might happen. Domination of the existing players. There's 50 companies right now. They're all going through the whole tough wars things, but it's all happening mostly in Nairobi. So the one observation I think will happen is that we'll get a few companies now surfacing to the top and actually dominating the market. Of course, this is in observance of fair competition and all that. But number two is that this competition should hopefully start pushing some of the medium to smaller companies outside Nairobi, because there are other secondary cities and towns that need to be electrified. I feel the vast majority of bodabodas are not in Nairobi, but outside in the peri-urban and rural areas. So that's another realization that will soon dawn on the companies, and we'll start seeing a bit of that happening outside. Number two is that the banking system is getting into the banking system is getting interested, but I'm thinking they'll move into financing EVs more, but they might not get to finance all types of EVs. Banks today struggle to finance bodabodas and tuk-tuk guys. I'm thinking this might not change in the next 5 to 10 years. But what can happen is that they'll probably have financing schemes for four-wheelers, buses, and others, which they have been funding. They've been funding circles for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Other realization is e-bicycles are becoming the rage. And this, because they're not mandated to be registered, we don't necessarily grasp the idea of e-bikes. We don't even see those numbers, but they're big because you don't need a license. You don't need a lot of education because they're not years. You just get on, you start pedaling, and the thing takes you. I think it's going to become a lot more common, especially for not just delivery riders, but slowly commuters.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking because they have a cool factor, I think we just start seeing more young people with them.
I think we're already seeing a lot of young people. Even where I work, I do see a number of people coming to the office with their bicycles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes sense because if you're in Nairobi, you're probably not commuting more than 50 kilometers either way going to work. And a bike can easily do that in a day. So yeah, that's becoming more and more of a reality. Foreign investment is still going to dominate. Local banks, local investors, funds are very slow, and I don't see that changing anyway in these next 10 years. It's to our loss because this is the opportunity to now jump in and at least have local investment actually promote the local startups. Many of the local founders, Kenya-based founders, depend on the local financing ecosystem and like local relationships and investors, because not all of them have access to foreign money. So that is to our loss. I think we need a lot more education and awareness for our local investment ecosystem, but yeah, I don't see that changing. Then guess where we get all our EVs from, or where we'll be getting them from? Take a guess. Any country that comes to mind.
Any country that comes to mind?
Yeah. When I think about EV.
In Africa or?
globally?
Um, I'd say the UK.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
That's
I will check. I'll check it. I'll check again.
yeah. And actually, you know what? I'll leave that to you. When you find out, you
On
will.
the next episode.
Yes, we can discuss that.
Yeah.
So that is going to be another trend about where the new source of vehicles is going to be, or the new source of EV technologies will be. I think that's something to observe.
Can I take my answer back?
Okay, yeah, try it.
I'm probably wrong, but I'll go check again. And that's just because I was there recently and I saw innovations. Estonia? No, maybe not. Okay, I'll go check. I will go check again, and that will be our first point of discussion in the next.
I'm excited about jobs that will be created now because of this new technology. I think there's a big opportunity for young people or people who want to pivot in their careers or people who are looking to be fast movers in another field.
Yeah.
Think about EVs and not just their vehicles, because if, let's say, you're not technical or you're not in the automotive space, I think there's many other services that complement EVs. It can be something around sales, it can be marketing, it can be comms, it can be content creation, it can be law, it can be insurance. This is the new space. So whatever angle you're coming at it, I think there's still a wide open opportunity to become a fast mover or a leader in that space. If not in Nairobi, in your regional area or in your town, I think there's a big opportunity to start introducing EVs wherever you are. Maybe just partnering with the companies that are battling it out in Nairobi and showing them there's an opportunity in your specific region.
Yeah.
So I think that's something to watch out for. At least I encourage the people that are thinking about innovation and like private sector activity to look into that. The other is that for the first time, we are seeing a shift in automotive legacy, i.e., the brands that you grew up knowing or you've commonly been seeing on traditional fossil fuel vehicles, it all change. Because if you think about motorcycles, there was just maybe three or so brands. It was Bajaj, it was TVS, it was Yamaha, and Honda. But today you hear of Arkride, you hear of EcoBoda, you hear of Kiri. These are all companies that are very, very like indigenous types of brands, the soil here. So and we'll see that replicate across the continent. So finally, there's excitement about people who want to start brands and change what the legacy landscape used to be. And I think this will slowly graduate away from motorcycles. It will go into cars and buses and anything. So again, that's another point of interest. As this EV space is unfolding, the conversation around inclusion and circularity should not be left behind. It's there. I think in the next 10 years, we have a big opportunity, and it's clearly showing that gender inclusion, social inclusion, circularity, these are social environmental issues that we've been lucky that they've been attached to the EV space, that as the sector is growing, there's consciousness around how to promote better society from these two angles. I think that will keep going. We might probably need to sit down and talk about that as well at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You should. Oh, I don't want to cut you off.
Final point is that, Kenya is not alone. We have our neighbors, as I've said, and many other countries are now waking up to the opportunity. So I think having people who can look outside and see what's happening and bring those technologies here to promote the country, that will be important. And also for policymakers, if they're not moving quickly enough and embracing what's out there. Right now, we have all the evidence. You don't need to say you don't know what other countries are doing. Come to us, come to AFEMA. We will tell you exactly what the neighboring country is doing and how you can also implement the same, sort of in supporting environment here. And to the young people, it's just like, if you get a chance to push any policy makers in that line, it's important because this is all the countries are at the same starting line. So if we don't apply the pressure, we'll again be caught second or last.
Well, thank you for listening to the first ever episode of Charge Kenya, a new podcast series on everything e-mobility in Kenya. We really look forward to hearing your feedback as the audience, and we hope to see you on the next one. Until next time, bye.